It is June 16th, in the year 2008, and this is a reprieve and a new start for the Three Siblings show. Our intent here today is to preserve the Parsons family history. We thought perhaps the video recording with sound would be better than each of us writing some kind of a memoir. So we're going to try to put a little bit of a show together. We are descendants of Menzie, Chestora, Barnhart Parsons and Gordon Wayne Parsons. 3 children, the 3 siblings. The oldest is going to join us in a few minutes, Eleanor Jane Parsons Kramer Shiloh, born March 22nd, 1937. I was second born, Terry Wayne Parsons, July 17, 1940, named after my dad. The third to arrive, March 3rd, 1942, Stuart Nelson Parsons, named after our grandfather, Nelson Parsons. So we're going to try to put together a little bit of a show that you hope will find of interest and some humor and preserve some of the family history for the Parsons family. We'll probably have stories that we'll tell you that will come out with different endings because we each have different memories of the same incident, but that will provide, I hope, some humor to the whole show. And I thought we first might start with a bit of history for the family. And it can be detailed or it can be brief. We'll give enough. We think you might get a flavor for the history, and Stuart's going to take it from there.
Okay, the Parsons lineage has been traced back. We have a cousin in Mount Vernon named Susie Davidson Cochran, who has been very diligent in tracking our family history, and she has a track back to Joseph Parsons, who was born in either 1617 or 1618 in Torrington, England. So at least we have some English blood in us, the Parsons name. He died in 1683. He was married to Mary Bliss, who I think was also from England. And the interesting thing about Mary Bliss is she was tried as a witch. And anybody in the Parsons family would be glad to know that she was acquitted. She served as her own lawyer and she did not get burned at the stake, but she did have a trial in Massachusetts for being a witch. So from those two people, we derived our current family, Parsons, from the following. They had a child, Joseph Parsons, who was born in 1647. Elizabeth Strong was his wife. They had a son, Daniel Parsons, who was born in 1685. He was married to Abigail Cooley. They had a son, Daniel Parsons, also. He married Esther Stibbins, and they had a son, Gideon Parsons, who, with his wife, Mary Warner, had a son named Gideon Parsons.
They didn't pass out Bibles at the motel rooms.
Could be. That's where the names come from. Well, that Gideon, number 2, who was born in 1779 in Massachusetts, was married to Clarissa Cleveland. And you'll see that name come up in the next generation because they had a son named Jedediah Cleveland Parsons, who was born in 1805 in Pompey, Onondaga County, New York State. And it is he and his wife, Sally Coleman, who moved to Licking County in 1836. And had several children, one of whom was our great-grandfather. I'm getting my notes here. Should have been Sumner Parsons, who was born in 1843 in Licking County, was married to Aura, A-U-R-A, Bedelia Burgoon, and they had then a number of children. I think there were 11 in their family. We have pictures of that entire family. And one of those children was our grandfather, Nelson Leroy Parsons. He was born on the 14th of April, 1874. Was married to Lulu Stevens for about 3 weeks. She got sick and died. His second wife was our grandmother, Alta. Her name is Myrtle Alta Stout. He was born February 5, 1880. And from that, then they had a child, Raymond, who did not live more than a few months, and 4 surviving children, who would be our father and our 3 aunts. Doris Marie Parsons was born in 1907. Helen Aletha Parsons, born in 1909. And Leela Ann Parsons, born in 1911. And then our father, Gordon Wayne Parsons, born in 1914, and as you stated, he was born November 13th, 1914. He always claimed he was born on Friday the 13th, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Therefore, every Friday the 13th in his entire life was really a day to be careful, because he thought that was a bad omen. Joking, he would always say, "That's my life's been dictated by my being born on Friday the 13th." With a wink in his eye, he'd say that.
And he married, as Terry said, Menzie Chestor Barnhart on May 4, I believe it was, 1936. We have a picture of that wedding day. We can talk more about that, but from that gives you the progression of family history clear back to 1617. There's been some debate about whether we have Welsh blood in us. I think that may have come from my mother's side. But we got all these women, of course, that were in our family, and they had relatives from various parts. We probably have German blood. We probably have, who knows what blood in us. But the Parsons lineage would go back to Torrington, England in 1617.
Unfortunately, we don't have that detail from mother's side.
Not as much, certainly.
But we could briefly go through that for a minute here. Her mother is the only grandparent we knew, Ada Barnhart, and there were 3 children. Oldest was Vaughn Barnhart, and then our mother, Menzie Chestora Barnhart, was second born, and then Dorothy. So we have the history of having an aunt and uncle on that side. They were raised around Harlem, Ohio, a small burg not too far from Westerville. She went to Albany High School.
Grew up on a farm.
Grew up on a farm. Our mother and father eloped to Greenup, Kentucky, just across the border. And we don't know the circumstances for that, but we anticipate it may have been because of age, although we're not sure of that they had to leave the state to become married. So the elopement, from what we can remember from stories, is that Dad, raised on the farm, current farm where we still own, had to kind of slip away at night, push the car to the driveway without starting it so that he could not be heard for the elopement. And his stepmother, Leslie Parsons, supposedly, when our grandfather awoke, reached over and said, "He's old enough, let him go."
Would have been about 22 or 21 and a half.
I can't think it was an age issue
No.
at that point, but we don't. Maybe mother was, of course, she was the same age, born in 1914. And he apparently drove to her home where the lights were on, the people were all up, and they were all happy to see him go. So 2 different kind of backgrounds about the elopement.
We might talk a little about Dad's childhood, because I think that's significant here in what you're talking
Yes.
about. His mother died in 1922 when he was only 8 years old. So that's why we didn't ever know her. He and his dad lived alone for a while until his dad remarried and married Leslie Fitzwater, and she had 1 daughter, Doris Fitzwater, who was a year or 2 younger than Dad. And growing up on the farm, I think Dad was already a shy young man, but I think this marriage was not particularly good for him, in the sense that he had a stepmother that really didn't care too much about him, but she was a very good wife apparently to Nelson. But I think my dad had a pretty unhappy childhood from whatever age I forget what year Leslie and Nelson married, but he went to a 1-room school just down the road on Edwards Road today.
Which we have been in.
Yes, we have.
We both have been in.
That's
It's gone now, we got to see it.
It had burned down back in the 70s. Eleanor claimed that she went down to take a picture of the schoolhouse so she could paint it. In fact, she did paint it, and it burned the next day. I don't know if it's vandals or what happened, but the schoolhouse was destroyed. I think it was called the Clark Schoolhouse. But in any event, his childhood was not a happy one, whereas I think our mother's was very happy. Even though her father, his name is Avon, he died when she was fairly young also. He died in a buggy train accident. And so she was raised in a single-parent home. Her mother did not remarry. Her mother was Ava Barnhart.
Ada.
Right.
She passed, we were only maybe 13, 14 years old. So we have memories of her, but not real distinct memories of her.
She's the only grandparent we knew. She was a wonderful lady. We can talk more about her in a moment as well. But I think the difference in the childhood between my dad and my mother was probably significant. Mother became much more extroverted. She was very active in high school, played basketball, and I don't know what other sports she graduated, number one in her class. In 1931, having graduated a year early, she skipped a year, and according to Eleanor, when she was questioned about that, she said, "Oh well, the teacher was my cousin." So I don't know if that's true, but she was a very smart woman and very active. And after and during high school, she and Dorothy were very active ballroom dancers, and had lots of dates and went to the Crystal Ballroom in Buckeye Lake and other in the what's the name?
Valleydale.
Valleydale.
Around Albany somewhere.
That's right. You know, it's right at the eastern edge of Columbus.
I have to think that was tough for Dad, because he would have not been a socialite by any means, being
No.
raised alone on the farm, and probably that was awkward for him at the very best. I can't see him being much of a dancer.
No, I'm sure he wasn't.
Maybe he had to be because of her, but
No, I don't think he ever went dances. And he used to tease Mom, if you remember that, about being a dancer, and she'd just sort of slough it off. And she had lots of boyfriends and was very popular.
beautiful woman. The pictures we have and memories of her was very attractive.
Yeah.
Vivacious, constantly
Happy.
whistling, happy. She would come out on the farm. We were going up to help milk cows in the morning, and she'd help the barn and come whistling back 100 yards back to the house, cook breakfast, and go through all the work she had to do. We'd be out maybe playing basketball out in the cold winter day with the tips of our fingers showing. We cut the gloves off, or they were just probably worn out, didn't have any money. And Dad put a backboard in the garage, and she'd walk by the barn, and we'd say, "Hey, Mom, take a shot." And she'd stop. "Sure." Big smile. Pull up her skirt, underhand free throw shot, and hit it.
Yeah.
We'd look at her. How did she do that? And he'd just smile and say, "Rah, rah, New Albany." And she'd go back to the barn.
She would. I mean, women at that time didn't have that kind of athletic role. They were, they were housekeepers and laundry people, and didn't have much of a. We didn't think about women being in sports and so forth. But didn't she race you? I know the barn is about 100 yards from the house, and I'm thinking, didn't she race you
I can't
once?
remember that. Dad and I would race a lot,
Yeah.
and I remember the first time I beat him, he just couldn't believe it. Of course, I was probably older than him, but he would laugh when he could beat us at the farm.
Yeah.
I think she did too, and she probably beat us.
I think she did. Well, I remember one day, speaking of when he raced you, he came in and said sheepishly to Mom, says, "It finally happened. Terry beat me in the 100-yard dash." And
I was wearing those knee boots we had to wear because it was so muddy, and that made it even worse for him.
Yeah.
Well, Dad, growing up, after losing his mother, would tell stories about how miserable his life was because he had no contact. He was, he claimed his stomach was ruined because all his dad knew how to cook was bacon and beans. So we had bacon and beans and bacon and beans. And then, of course, Mother, a phenomenal cook. She and Aunt Dorothy would take turns winning the first place prize at the Grange and the church suppers. And I can still see at the church supper where there would be a line of people waiting for this potluck in the basement of Miller Church. They're on 37, that's 62, that would have been about 62 between Johnstown and Columbus. And they'd crane their necks around to see at the front. They'd yell out, what did men's bring this week? What did men's bring? Man, what men's brought? So he probably, because of his history of having terrible food, that was a great attraction because he had now fantastic food.
Well, let's talk a minute about, before we get to our generation, let's talk a little more about Nelson and Dad growing up. I think it's important for our children, grandchildren, and future generations to know the history of the farm,
Absolutely.
because it has a lot of meaning to us. Nelson and his wife Myrtle Alta bought our present farm, 80 acres on Edwards Road in 1910, April 9th in 1910. So that farm has been in our family soon to be 100 years. This is 2008, as Terry mentioned in the beginning. And so from that farm, he paid, we figured from the deed we have, he paid $60 an acre for this. Is that right?
Yes.
$6,000. It was only 80 acres.
80 acres, more than that.
So a little more than that for him. And he borrowed $4,000 from someone named Mary Trotter, who I think must be a relative. That name Trotter was in our family tree somewhere, so we're going to have to research that. But so that farm, that 80 acres, has been in our family ever since 1910. In that farmhouse, which was there prior to the purchase, I'm sure, and the barn, we think, was built probably in the 1860s from what records we've seen. And it has hand-hewn beams in that barn. My dad always said that means it's a very old barn. He said it's got to be 100 years old. Well, that was back when he was alive. So, and on that farm, that 80 acres, Nelson raised his family, Nelson and his wife, Alta, Myrtle Alta. And interesting, if you go out there today, you go through the barns. Those are the same. It's the same barn that he worked in. Had workhorses and raised his family, worked hard, baled hay, and not baled hay, made hay, and farmed all those years and raised his family, including our father. Then his wife Alta died in 1922, as I mentioned. So that farm has then progressed just to Nelson. But when he died in 1937, May of 37, there was some controversy about that farm because my dad, who had grown up on the farm and stayed after high school to farm with his dad, was under the understanding that if he stayed and worked on the farm with his dad after high school, that when he died, the farm would be passed to my father. Well, it turned out there was no will found. At least that's my recollection of the story. You had a little different version, but Dad did serve as administrator of his father's estate and indicated he did not have a will. So that meant the law spoke as to where the property was to go, and by virtue of the fact that Nelson was married to Leslie at the time of his death, she was entitled to 1/3 of his estate. Well, and then the other 2/3 would pass to our father Wayne and his 3 sisters. Well, for Dad to get the farm, he had to, in fact, buy the farm. He had to pay off his stepmother's 1/3, and we're not sure what he did with his sisters, whether they paid them something or whether they just agreed to let him have it, because that was their recollection as well. But anyway, my father dearly paid for that farm at a time in 1937 when he was newly married, had a new baby. Would have been a real hardship for him to pay for that farm on 80 acres. So that has a lot of history. The farmhouse he was born in 1914, and I assume that Leela was born in that house as well. He was born in 1911, so which was customary at that time for children to be born at home, particularly farm families, rather than a hospital. And in fact, Terry and I were born in that farmhouse as well. So it has a lot of history. His mother passed away during that time. I assume she passed away in that house. Our own mother, in 1958, died in that house. So that farm has a lot of history, which we hold pretty dear. Mike wanted to say that Dad bought another 37 acres from William A. Ashbrook in 1945 and paid $70 an acre for that land. And we think that the purchase price when he bought the land from his dad's estate was $40, which with 1937, probably was a depression year. If that price is right, then that means the price of the farm went down between 1910 and 1937. So, but in any event, it has a long history. And
I think the part that we like to really convey to our heirs is the sacrifice that he and our mother went through to buy back his own inheritance. In effect, he had to buy back what was rightfully his. We don't have any ability, of course, to check the veracity of the tales, but my recollection is that either this stepmother changed the will while my grandfather was in a hospital from a broken leg, a horse kicked him, and therefore she became the heir of the farm. Or, more likely, we're finding out, this is what I think Dad told me, she changed the will. But maybe Dad meant she destroyed the will, or hid the will. So, whatever happened, the 3 sisters, Helen, Doris, and Leela, per Dad's story, had somehow said, you've suffered long and hard on the farm, you deserve the farm, we don't need to have any part of the farm, it's yours. Or perhaps he paid them a little bit for that. He borrowed $4,000 from Raleigh DeCrow, a man in Johnstown he respected greatly. And $4,000 in 1936-37, of course, would be an immense amount of money for a young couple who just married with a baby. They probably came back on their honeymoon and had to rent a place. I think, in fact, they rented a home owned by the stepmother, Leslie, across the field someplace.
And that's where Eleanor was born.
She was born there. And to think about how they had to work and save to be able to get the ability to even borrow $4,000 to pay off what was rightfully his to begin with, she was his with no cost. So he had to buy back his own farm, is what it amounted to. So the 3 of us, are very grateful and very humbled by the fact that the sacrifices he and Mother made to get the farms back in very trying circumstances. So we're always, hopefully the rest of our heirs will keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay, now we can talk about, if you'd like, our childhood, if you want to get to that next, and what our memories are. We will cover more when Eleanor joins us. But we might want to talk about what life was like on the farm as far as when we were young. I think
This is 1940s.
Yeah, right.
Which seems like not very long ago to us, but people watching this, they'll think this is ancient history.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us about the? Well, let me start and say. Let me remember the first thing I remember. Born 1942, or probably a 2 or 3 year old. The first thing I remember, as far as the farm life is concerned, is sitting on my mother's lap when she was driving a team of horses. And this is even more outlandish, I think, for young people to think about all the things we have today. But in my lifetime, we did not have mechanized farm equipment. And I remember sitting on her lap to this team of horses. I think they're both black, weren't they? Naked and
Best were black.
And one had a white star, maybe.
And very large.
Very large horses. And she was riding to a corn binder. But I think that you might talk about, let me describe one other event I remember very early, which was the hay loader. Because I think it describes what farm life was like and how hard it was for my dad to raise a family and to grow up on this farm, and how involved our mother was in this farm work. I remember riding on her lap while she was driving a team of horses in the hayfield. Dad had made windrows with the horses, so you've got a row of cut hay on the ground. You've got to get on the wagon. But what you used was a hay loader, which was a tall piece of equipment. You'd run the equipment under the hay and lift it. Had teeth that lifted the hay up over a long chute and dropped it on behind you, which you pulled a wagon behind you. So Dad would be on the wagon, and the hay would come over the top of the hay loader, and he would shift the hay with a pitchfork around the wagon to get as big a load as he could get. And that would take some time to get enough hay on that loose hay on a wagon. Then he would signal to Mom to stop. He would come around, unhitch the wagon, pull the team up, unhitch the team, back the team up to the wagon. We'd all get on I don't know how we rode on this, but on the wagon, hay wagon. And he would drive the team up to the barn, which was some distance from the hayfield, and as he backed the wagon with the team, which was a lot of gee, ha, shouting, and it takes some time to get the team to back the wagon into the barn.
Into the incline.
Okay.
A small opening.
Incline, a small opening. Then he would unhitch the team from the wagon, pull it out in front of the barn, hook up a long rope to the team, and my mother at that point would take over the team, and he would go on the wagon and use a big hay fork, which I have in the garage, by the way, I've preserved it, to stick in the hay and cinch it tight so that it would then get a big group of hay with it. And Mom would he'd signal Mom, she'd drive the horses out in the barnyard, pulling the rope, which was on several pulleys, pull the hay up into the mow, slide it across to where he wanted, and he'd trip the rope, drop the hay in the hay mow. And
sometimes in the hay mow. Sometimes back on top of him.
Well, that's true.
The horses might jerk, and Mom couldn't contain him, and the hay would then on top of him, and it's hot, sticky, humid day, all this chaff would be on him.
Bees everywhere, I suppose.
He just loved that, of course.
Yeah. But every time he had to climb the ladder up to get the mow, climb back down again, and Mom would back the team up, reverse that process until he could get 4 or 5 loads up in the mow. I remember watching him do this and thinking, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. And he'd have to get the mound, have to move the hay around the mound to where it could get as much hay as he could in there. And until the wagon load was empty. I mean, how long would this take? I mean, just a tremendous amount of work to get 1 load of hay in your barn. It's got to take hours to do that 1 load. And you might talk about the team of horses, what your experience with that.
Well, I can remember on that day that we were talking about, those kind of days, Mom was trying to balance probably you and I on her lap, driving these horses, and we're probably on the wagon because the hay's piling up.
Huh.
And she didn't see an overhanging limb from a tree.
Oh, dear.
And it hit this hay loader and broke part of the hay loader. And of course, Dad is spewing about how he's going to get this fixed, and the hay is going to get ruined because we can't get it out. So all was not peaches and cream.
No. But think of the risk that you have 3 kids with you while you're trying to do farming. We're
couldn't leave the house.
we got horses, we got machinery there, we got fall off things. And then we were all with them, I'm sure, because they didn't have a babysitter. You have to just take your kids with you.
He would take a ceramic-like jug of water from the dug well at the barn, fill it, take it back to where we were working, 137-acre farm, and he'd have, I don't know, 3 or 4 dug wells all over the farm to feed animals, and he'd drop that jug into the well to keep it cold, so we have water back there. The stories about the early days with horses are vivid to me because it was such a scary thing for me, because I was the oldest and therefore expected, I guess, to do a lot more work. I can remember Dad expected me, for example, to be the one to take over if something happened to him. I'm probably 10, 12 years old, and he teach me how to shoot a rabbit with a shotgun, scare me to death and bang on my shoulder. He wanted me one day, I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, I suspect, maybe younger because I couldn't reach the horses. And he wanted me to go into the barn, which of course was to us large and dark because it's big, giant Percheron horses. And he said, go get Nick and Bess and take them across the barnyard for water, a tank of water. And I'm thinking to myself, is he talking to me? How can I do that? Of course, he made me do it. Shaking, I went to that barn and got between these 2 giant horses, just certainly going to kick me all the way out the door. Of course, they were very gentle, docile animals in his eyes, but they were just monsters to us, and beautiful Percherons, all black. So I'm trying to get up and catch the halter, and I can't reach it so high. And I got to get both of them. Well, finally, I think one of them came down to get some hay, put his head down, so I grabbed it and got a death grip on it. I'm just trembling with fear. And I jumped, couldn't get the other one, and finally he came down for hay, so I grabbed him. And I'm just standing there, and the horses then, Dad probably said, whatever he said, click, click or something, and the horses picked me up off the ground in the barn, carried me out the barn door across this cement piece. I'm just tiptoeing across, trying to keep my feet in the ground, and he carried me across the barnyard. He's howling with laughter at this, all the way probably 60, 70 yards out to where this tank was. They let me down, and I'm not going to let go. I'm afraid I'll never get it again. So I stood there where they drank about, it seemed to me, 10, 15 minutes of water, picked me up, carried me across the barnyard back in the barn and dropped me off. And I came out the door just, I'm alive. I'm thrilled to be alive. And he is just bent over in laughter about why I'm so scared of these 2 horses.
And they're huge horses, particularly at that age. I
can remember back in one of the fields there, we called the new part of the farm, which would be the part he bought 37 acres. He would have a disc, which is very small. Horses can pull into a disc. And I'd sit in his lap, and he would sing to me, "You Are My Sunshine."
Oh, my. Yeah. Wow.
So then the horses, of course, once we would be going into lunch, for example, they would hurry to the barn. So you had to be careful and he'd have me drive them in. He'd hook this, whatever instrument was, in the back of the farm, way back, we called the 18 acres, the back part of the farm. And he would say, you drive them in.
Oh,
I came with these reins, it's big, heavy.
I can see that smile. That sly smile on his face, too.
He's like, you got to get ready to go to the farm. You drive them in. Again, I'm probably 8 or 10 years old. I picked up these reins. I hardly pick them up. They're so heavy because they're heavy, old leather. Mm-hmm. You stand on top of that, I guess he called it a double tree or a single tree, which was a wooden piece you hooked up to the instrument you're going to pull. And you ride on that, dragging across the ground. And so he would say, click, click, and away they'd go. And he'd say, now don't let them go too fast. I'm pulling back all I've got without making errors at all, of course. And they would trot to the barn to get water and gather sun, have a noonday break.
Oh. Wow.
He would have 3 horses on occasion. Roanne was the 3rd horse.
What color was Roanne? Do you know? She a
roan. A roan. That's why they call her Roanne, because she was not. I don't think she was a Percheron.
What's roan? Is it like spotted, brown?
Well, as I recall, it had red and white. A roan was generally red and white. Now, red is not vivid red, but
the roan wasn't as big as the other 2, was she?
I don't think so. And I don't know why. Of course, he had several horses before we were born, more than 2. We might even tailgate on that and tell about that they got his first tractor while we're talking about the horses. Because in those days, of course, horses were everything. Everybody had horses and proud of it. And I remember he bought, I don't know how old we were, I'm going to guess it had to be 47, 48.
I'm thinking 48.
Something like 8 years old.
48. 49, I'm not sure. I would have been 7 and 49, so it's about right.
We need to bear in mind here that there are 5 of us living on 137 acres, which he always called stricken acres. These are stricken acres. He'd laugh, meaning I can't make a living on stricken acres. And we had corn, beans, wheat.
Well, of the 137, only 100 was tillable, because the rest was woods.
And he raised sheep. Of course, had milking shorthorn cattle, which he milked, and hogs. So he had a true purpose. Chickens, true dairy farm. And somehow, over that time, he managed to not only provide for us, but he put 3 of us through college on 100 acres of tillable ground, which we still to this day don't know how to do it. Well, I can see him yet. He bought this used Oliver 60, which was the smallest tractor Oliver made. And it was, of course, to him.
Model 60. There's a Model 60, not 1960.
Model 60. On what year it would have been. It was used when he bought it.
Yep.
And the dealer was somewhere between Johnstown and Croton, which is probably 6, 7 miles, 8 miles away.
Every bit of that from it.
So he drove this tractor home. I can still see him come the driveway.
He's so proud of that one.
Oh, and to him, of course, now life will change dramatically. No more need to
It
rely
did.
on horses. And of course it did. I can remember when he bought that first new car he ever had, 1949 Ford. Money must have been coming a little easier there because he had a ability to buy a 49 Ford, a brand new car.
36 Ford.
37, I think it was.
37, green.
Green.
Yeah, it was a rabbit trap, I remember.
And he bought this new Ford, and it was the first car that didn't have a balloon bubble shape. It wasn't. It was squared off trunk and then squared off back window top and squared off hood.
Yeah.
And the neighbors would say, "Hey Wayne, I can't tell if you're coming or going. Where's the front of that car?" And he, of course, would laugh. It was a really big deal.
And we were all proud of that car. It had standard transmission, obviously at that time, but it was a nice car. And I never take rides on Sunday afternoons. And of course, my favorite story was my sister, if she were here, would tell us about how we would stop. We were out for a Sunday afternoon drive, stopped for ice cream cones, and we all had eating ice cream cones driving down the road. And he came to a double set of railroad tracks, as I remember. I'm not sure. I'm thinking it's over by Black Lake somewhere. I don't know. But anyway, he slowed the car down because he wanted to go real slow across these uneven railroad tracks, the brand new car. And as he started across, the engine died because of standard transmission. He wasn't used to driving a new car, I suppose. And so he reaches down to start the car, and he realizes there's a train coming down the track. Well, now here's this whole family in this car that's stalled on the railroad tracks. He's panicking. He's flooded the engine, and I'm eating my ice cream cone. I'm not old enough to know what's going on. He yelled at all of us to get out of the car and push the car off the tracks. So everybody jumps out of the car and throw their ice cream cones away and push this car off the track. Well, after they got the car safely across. I think the railroad engineer beeped his horn to tell us to get out of the way. But anyway, we were off safely on the side. They all got a big laugh at the fact that I still had my ice cream cone. So I had price.
He was the baby of the family. Yeah, he got privileges.
I was willing to do somewhat. I had one hand on the car. I needed my ice cream cone with the other. But he was so proud of that 1949 Ford, and we got a picture of that somewhere as well.
Was it a two-door? Had to be because I can't remember had a 4-door car that we always had to get everything big 4-door to be safe, of course, because of the back seat.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Remember how we used to have to go out in a driveway with towels and dry the dust? It was navy blue.
Yeah.
And Sis hated that job.
To
go out, get the dust off. Dad took the dust off the car. We didn't wash cars in those days much, I guess, because whatever. But we had to go out and take the dust off with these towels. And of course, navy blue was hard to get off, and she hated that job.
I didn't remember.
So we kidded.
I was too young. I guess being the youngest.
If you didn't have to do it, I remember.
I was too busy eating ice cream cones. But anyway, that was a wonderful event. But having a tractor would have changed his life substantially. The other thing, he bought used equipment. That was sort of the way he farmed.
Yes.
He always liked to keep his costs down, and you think about that, 100 acres of tillable land would be a lot of work for someone with horses, and would be not nearly as bad with a tractor. But he had to buy a lot of new equipment that would be or modify the planter, the disc, all the equipment that he had, the harvesting equipment would have to be changed to a more modern version. So it was a big expense for him to do that, I suppose. But
I can remember very clearly how the biggest money crop was wheat. And boy, we had to sack wheat out of this old combine back in the back part of the farm on top of the wagon. You pull the combine, draw the auger down, and the wheat would come out in the sack. Of course, I'm not very big. I pulled this big burlap sack, and once in a while, I'd let it get too full and it spill out. And boy, would I get it because that was an awful lot of money.
Sure.
I remember one time at night, we were in the house, and I heard him say to Mother, men's, he called her men, look at this. Biggest check we ever had, $300. That was the biggest check of the year of income that they had for the farm. So seed, wheat was very expensive. Everything they had was expensive. So we can't imagine, and our kids even don't believe the stories we tell of our growing up. But for example, the biggest treat of the week for us at the farm was a Saturday night in Johnstown. Johnstown's a town of maybe at that time 2,500 people.
Oh, I'm not sure it's that big.
And had
Maybe
one
1,500.
main street. And of course, there's a red and white grocery store. Mom would go and buy what groceries they could afford. Didn't have at the farm. We had, of course, our own beef, our own pork, and our own vegetables, and our own fruit. So Dad would always tell us, if you guys work hard all week and you behave all week, I'll buy you an ice cream cone maybe on Saturday night. Well, our biggest treat of the week would be to get a nickel ice cream cone maybe on a Saturday night.
Which is a big ice cream cone.
For us, and of course, we thought that was a great thrill. So he would take us in this, I don't know what the store was called, became an Izzy store eventually, and we'd get a choice. You had your choice. You could have vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry. Take your pick. One, that's all they had. Then the Izzy store came to town, and we thought we had hit the jackpot because now they were skyscrapers. They'd scoop down and get a big tall piece. 7 cents was the price of that cone. And I can also recall on those Saturday nights, we'd be up there bored to death. Dad would listen to all the stories guys would tell at the downtown. He'd swap stories of these people in humor. And in fact, I remember the guy on the furniture store, Hughes, I can't tell you his first name, but Orley or something like that. Hughes.
Warren, maybe?
Or an older gentleman. They were outside talking Saturday night. It's dark, and Dad would say, well, Ori, how you been? He said, Wayne, I'm really fading. I'm really fading fast. Well, what's wrong? Wait, I'm losing my eyesight. Well, what do you mean? Well, he said, for example, see those 2 flies in that building across the street? Dad'd say, yeah, I can't tell the male from the female anymore. That kind of humor. And I can vividly recall some Saturday nights, we'd be all done, whatever happened downtown. Mom had a few groceries she could afford in the red and white store. And Dad would say, man, you got any spare change? Well, let me look. She pulled out a purse and she pulled out some nickels and pennies, whatever it was. Can we afford a quart of ice cream? Yeah, we got enough. So they'd go in the store and get a hand-packed quart of ice cream, plus vanilla. All they have is vanilla. We'd rush home the 3.5 miles. We're in the back seat, can't wait to get there because we want a little ice cream. And that was all they could afford for a Saturday night treat. Of course, we get in the house, and he'd get half of that, and we'd moan and groan about, I didn't get my share, get my share. And of course, Mom would say, well, you didn't work all week either, that kind of thing, and she'd smile. So. But that gives you some indication of how difficult life had to be for them in terms of finances, because that was a major treat.
Well, the income from the farm would have been minimal. You'd milk cows, and would have had a monthly milk check. I don't know what that might have been.
Couldn't have been very much, because we only had 8 or 9 cows.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And we helped milk those cows, of course, on occasion.
I didn't do much of that. Being a youngster, I claimed I was too young to do a lot of things. But anyway.
Well, I was tall always for my age. I think that dad did believe, therefore you could do more than you should do. My wife, I'd like to say, when she had to work on the farm, her dad would say, your pant legs are too short. She couldn't reach a clutch on the tractor. So your pant legs are too short. So I was in that category too. He'd milk the cows in the morning. I remember another crazy story about how always kittens around, because we always had cats, of course, at the barn. And the barn behind the cows and the cow stable was probably a space of 10 feet, were some windows that he would slide open. It was hot in the summer. And a cat would come along and put up his head in that window. He could turn and squeeze and shoot milk into that cat's mouth all the way across the.
You ever seen him do that? 6 or 8 feet away.
Right over there.
Well, I remember when they were on the ground. I remember they were hanging in the window.
Yes, he'd not the window. They wouldn't get all across. He squirted milk across. They'd catch it and then he'd come back for more.
Yeah, I tried to milk a cow once, and I never could quite get the hand coordination that it took. He could really get that going.
Yes. Of course, he was impatient with me because I couldn't do it as well. I was fast, and he'd go fast.
Each of the cows had a name.
Oh, yes.
And he'd say, go get so-and-so next, and you'd have to go get Babe or whatever. But he'd get up early in the morning, 12 months a year,
Twice
before
a day.
dark. If in the wintertime, it'd be before light, I should say.
Yeah. And
go out and milk those 8 or 10 cows or 12 cows, whatever he had. Mom would fix breakfast.
She helped with milk.
She helped me milk,
too.
that's true. And then we could come down to a big breakfast. Not about the time I'd get out of bed. I'd have to go to school or whatever. I would be a late riser. But he'd already done, an hour and a half's worth of work for you, even
for breakfast.
Yeah. And then you have to go out and work in the field in case it's summertime. And Mom would go out after she cleaned the breakfast dishes up, and she'd go out and work with him in the fields. We had 2 tractors then later on. If not, she'd be supporting a role of some kind. She'd be out in the field with him. She always wore dresses, which I thought was amazing.
I don't think women wore shorts in those days or pants.
I got a picture of Mom in clam diggers. And I know
that's right. She had, and Dorothy used to wear clam diggers. Remember that now?
But I know Norma said, my cousin Norma, said that she never knew Aunt Mincy ever had clam diggers until that picture. But we all remember now that maybe she did have. But anyway, and then Mom would come back and fix a huge, called a dinner. at noontime, and she had a signal or used the bell. I'm not sure when Dad knew when to come in for dinner. And she'd clean up, and he'd go back to the fields. Then she'd go back and join him in the afternoon, and do the same thing for a supper meal. But one thing we had, Terry, was plenty of food to eat. We didn't have any money, but we sure had lots of good food. We had all the hamburger, prime beef steaks, and
fresh vegetables from the garden, cherries from the cherry tree in the back,
eggs, milk.
fresh eggs, fresh milk from the barn.
Of course, the milk was not homogenized or pasteurized, so you'd put it in a bottle, put it in the refrigerator overnight. You'd have half of it be cream if you had cows that had rich milk. We had lots of homemade ice cream because of the eggs and the milk. And you have to buy a whole lot of other things, sugar and things like that. But we ate really well.
Dad would, for cereal, he'd take the bottle out of the refrigerator.
Sure.
The refrigerator is a very small device. We both can, I can remember Dad about the refrigerator in the house. I can remember Dad had electricity, as a matter of fact, not running water.
Wasn't it?
GE. And he would pour the cream onto his own cereal. If he left me what he called blue milk.
All blue milk, yeah.
So he'd hand it to me, I put my cereal, and he said, "How can you ever eat that like that? How do you eat that blue milk?" Of course, he'd taken all the cream. What choice did I have? The other story about that comes to mind is when we were probably, I don't know, junior high school, I began to hear from Dick Snaufer, the basketball coach, and Derek Cornell football coach, you need to have a lot of milk and you need to have a lot of eggs to get stronger and gain weight and so on. And he actually bought a Guernsey cow
I remember that,
that
yes.
had golden milk, they call it, as opposed to the shorthorn, which was less creamy and rich. So we would get richer milk. And that would be a big step for him because he was a milking shorthorn.
No wonder our clogged
Yeah,
up
that's
all
what
that-
happened.
all that fat in the milk. But yeah, you were thin and tall, and I think they worried about whether you were getting the right nourishment. You were growing real fast. I fortunately was just plain short. And I know there's some discussion about how I could get taller, but I never got that formula for that.
We'll talk about nicknames while you're there. We had a crazy nickname situation.
Well,
and Eleanor, of course, was 3 years older than me, 2 than Stuart. In fact, 5 than Stuart. She remembers the day you were born. She
Yes.
was telling the farmhouse who was Mabel Piper brought this, and she was there. And she was anemic. She was just pale and didn't eat and wouldn't eat. And you, apparently, they thought didn't eat enough either. And of course, I couldn't find enough to eat, so it was really strange. But for some reason, now that's how you got the name Stub, and then it became Tub, because I guess they then began to call me Tub after a while. I was chunky, I guess, after a while, and had blonde hair.
Well, as a toddler, you were chunky, but as you started
Change
growing.
long, yeah.
Well, my recollection is, and I thought it was Eldon Wade, but I could be wrong, that you were called Stub because you were chunky at that toddler age. When I came along 2 years later, Eldon said, "Well, we can't call him Stub, we'll have to call him Tub." That was the story I remember. But I had that nickname all through school, all through high school. Even today, if I see my high school classmates at a class reunion, there's somebody call me Tub. And that was a name I quickly got rid of when I went to college. Nobody knew me. I became my Stu Parsons after that.
Eldon Wade was a family friend and a good friend of Dad's, and he would come out, for example, and shear sheep in the winter. In those days,
Yeah.
cold, early March day, and Dad would be outside bringing in the sheep to be sheared, and Eldon would shear them and they'd let them out the door. Well, Eldon thought it'd be cute one day if I tried chewing tobacco. So the barn doors are closed, the sheep can't get out, and he gave me a plug of this stuff, and if I put it out, I'm chewing away, making a big face at how horrible it is, and Dad opened the door. And Eldon's yelling at me, spit it out, don't you, Dad? Said, spit it out.
But you didn't have any trouble doing it.
I didn't have trouble all doing that. No, it may have been a good lesson for me, I don't know. I didn't chew the rest of my
Well,
life.
Eldon Wade was a good friend of Dad's, and he used to tell the story about how when they first got their cars during high school or after graduation, I don't know, it must have been after graduation, maybe even after he was married, that he and Eldon would occasionally pass each other on the road. And of course, there were single lane roads to Johnstown at that time. And they had developed this habit of they'd pass on the wrong side. They'd go on the left side. When they're meeting a car, they'd go on the left side rather than the right side. And they just wave as if everything's normal.
Did that.
And once in a while, they have a passenger with them who would just absolutely go ballistic when they started going on the left side of the road. Oh, my, what are you doing? What are you doing? And of course, they just wave. And he'd have stories. I mean, those kind of things they did because they didn't have any money to be going to ball games or shows. This is the kind of entertainment they had. So.
The winters were particularly rugged on the farm.
Oh, my, yes.
We didn't have enough heat in the house because it was hard to keep it warm. The basement was where the washing machine was the wringer washer. It was always backed up with water from the field. the cistern was down there, and of course, cistern is a large, in this case, a brick tank that was built out of the
We'll
house,
probably
so,
get more of that later.
so you could collect the water in the cistern. I remember going on the Saturdays, and he'd make me, the tractor wouldn't start, but the truck wouldn't. He had to get feet around. He would make me drive the tractor. I'm too young to do this on the road with a very short rope, pulling this truck down the road. I'm absolutely frozen. There's no cab on the tractor. And he's yelling, "Go faster, go faster."
To pull the car to get it
And
started.
don't break the rope.
Yeah.
Well, how am I going to do that? No, so we go all the way from the house up to Five Corners, which is probably, I don't know, too far. Just freezing. And finally, it's starting to stop. And it's starting. He blamed me because my fault I didn't go fast enough for the tractor. And frozen. Just frozen.
Let's go back to the heat of the house. I remember a pot-bellied stove when I was real young, in what became our dining room, and that was probably the only source of heat, I would guess, in the whole house for a long time. Probably my grandfather lived there. But in any event, I do remember, and probably one of the reasons why he dug out underneath the house and made a cellar. But I remember this. It has what do you call it? Ceramic tile, not concrete block tile for foundation. Anyway, and he put in a coal furnace down there, and eventually got a stoker, which was you put the small chips of coal into the stoker and it fed it into the furnace. And it seemed like at least every other morning the stoker would plug up or something, I don't know, and we wouldn't have any heat in the morning. In the wintertime, you knew pretty quickly when you jump out under the bed and put your feet on the floor that we didn't have any heat. And it was cold upstairs anyway, because all you had, we had water water radiators upstairs, and they had to be bled, had to let the steam out, and it was just a horrible. But the other thing I remember is the smell of that coal smoke was terrible. I always hated that smell. Even today when you go through southern Ohio and people are burning coal, and maybe they don't even drink anymore, but you could smell that smoke and it brought me back to the days when we were young. But he'd have to go down and say, "Oh, the stoker went out." He'd have to go down and try to fool with it.
And a stoker was a big advancement.
Yeah.
Because they had to shovel it. Now you get an automatic stoker.
Remember the residue of the coal, called clinkers?
Right.
And you have to haul those out and you dump in the driveway like gravel.
Particularly in snow.
Yeah. But the winter times were not pleasant times. And of course, he had to go out and milk the cows. He had to feed the animals. He had to do various farm chores. It was also a time when he had more free time, as far as that goes. He'd fix equipment and so forth, but he spent more time with us.
There was no trips to Florida, certainly, in the winter in those days, or Arizona. The pre-running water days, I can remember, and I can remember, you probably can too, the pre-indoor plumbing days. We had an outhouse out back, and you'd have to go out there, rain, snow, whatever, and you always had to make sure there was a Sears and Roebuck catalog out there. It wasn't just for reading. So that's hard to imagine for
no electricity. I don't remember that, but what, did you have kerosene lanterns?
I can just barely remember kerosene lantern. I know the lantern, exactly. I don't remember it having much to do with that. I remember the kerosene lanterns. And the Saturday night bath was always such great fun for the three kids.
We're going to talk about that later on, I think, when Elmer's with us.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. It's not, you had to go heat your own water before electricity, I suppose, and to do laundry or to do bathing. You had to make up your own.
It was a dug well. It wasn't a drilled well in those days.
Well, I remember we used to go down and used to have this. You mentioned these dug wells throughout the farm, and I know of at least. Well, there's one where it built the new house there, and there's at least one or two up where the hog house is now. There. And there's one back by the woods. I remember that one. So at least, well, that is 4 or 5. I don't remember one down in the house. Was there one?
I don't either. I think it was barn only, wasn't
it? You had to carry the water down from the. I think it doesn't make sense. So you had
long carry with it. I don't remember.
Lighters were extremely hard at that time, and without electricity, you'd go to bed early because you couldn't read. I suppose you had no television. You had no source of entertainment, so you probably went to bed early and got up with dawn. That would be the typical farm life of that. But I don't remember too much about that without electricity. I must have been very young when we finally. I know Dad was so pleased when we got electricity, and that would be a huge advancement.
Couldn't afford to buy anything, probably, but at least you had electricity.
He was never a fan of Franklin Roosevelt, but he said, "I got to give him credit. He got us electricity." And the Rural Electrification Act in 1933, where it was, and brought electricity to a lot of farmers, including ours, and that just changed everything in terms of how much work could now be done with electricity. And of course, electricity would go out a lot every time we had a storm in the summertime. We'd lose our electricity. That was kind of exciting because it was unusual, and you didn't have any light. Everything you tried to do, you can't do that because of electricity. But then you had to worry about the refrigerator, the food in the refrigerator. Sometimes you'd be out for some time, and the lines would go down, and But I don't remember too much about that. Maybe you do. It must have happened. I was born 42. I would say maybe by the time I was 3, 1945 or something. Electricity. A terribly hard life. Let's talk about our economic. You mentioned that we didn't have a lot of money. I remember gathering the eggs and Mom would take them into the grocery and sell the eggs and buy groceries. So we didn't have a lot of money in those days. I think I remember we used to take turns on gathering the eggs, which I never liked to do that job. The hen house behind the house was probably about 50 yards away, but maybe even less than that. But it was a smelly place and dusty, and chickens were not the easiest things to get along with. If they're sitting on the nest, they'd be underneath to get the eggs, and sometimes they'd peck the back of your hand, and it was just a very unpleasant job. We had to take turns doing that. And I remember, unfortunately, maybe we can get into this a little bit, the way we lived as kids. We used to play a lot of jokes with my older sister, Eleanor. And I'm ashamed to admit that we did these things now, but at the time it was innocent fun, and the two brothers would gang up on my sister a lot. Do things like we'd run up to her room and hide behind something, and she'd come into her room, and we'd jump out and stare. I mean, just silly things that probably made her a very nervous person, I would guess.
She liked to sunbathe. She was never what you call a farm girl. She was always daydreaming about being a New York City type shows, and she would sunbathe outside the kitchen window down below our bedroom. He and I shared a bedroom, of course, upstairs. And beautiful, bright, cloudless, sunny day. We'd go upstairs with squirt guns. And but was it you or maybe?
Well, I probably did, but I wasn't the brains.
I know I did.
I wasn't the brains behind the outfit, I'll tell you that.
And we would fill our squirt guns, and then we'd get down below the window, which could see us, and squirt through the screen down a story where she was laying on the blanket, and she'd fill us with water, and she'd think, boy, how is that raining when it's just so clear outside?
And she might be a little naive about some things. I'd seem to be a teen, you'll figure that out pretty quickly.
She probably did.
Well, we did lots of terrible things. She used to have cut-out dolls, and she'd make dresses, and she always wanted to be like fashion. And she'd make dresses that had little tabs, and she'd stick them around the little paper dolls. She did that for hours and hours. Typical, and that was dumb. We were always playing ball. We were always doing physical things, and we were terribly unkind to her.
One of the awful stories, it was not real fun, was when Mom was walking the barn one day. We were getting ready for school. Couldn't be very old, and Eleanor was supposed to cook breakfast for us. And she didn't care to be cooking. It wasn't her biggest thrill. And she cooked some eggs. And the egg that she gave me a print, I didn't think was quite done enough. So I started to get after her and tease her about it. And we started chasing her around the dining room table.
Oh my.
And round and round.
She was chasing you?
I was chasing her.
You were chasing her. Oh, okay.
I wasn't going to do it, but I was mad at her. And somehow I couldn't catch her. So I ran by Mom's sewing kit. And I grabbed a pair of scissors. And I threw it at her, not hoping to hit it. And I stuck it, and it stuck right in the calf of the leg.
Jeez.
Of course, she's wailing, and then, of course, Mom heard that and came in the house, and I really got it from there, from Dad, of course, for doing that.
She had her physical injuries. She described checking out the wringer on the washer. Why the heck you put your finger in that and you crack it? You know, she's got a mutilated finger from that episode.
Right.
So she's had her share. Then I remember she had a bad bike accident. I remember the wheels down the road from us, right on the other side of the.
Sprained a knee pretty badly.
Oh, she came back crying and screaming about this, and she had her leg all scraped up, and so she had her share of injuries. And some we may have given her some mental injuries along the way. I remember that my favorite story, and I've told my kids this, but I'll preserve it here for our posterity. But my favorite story is the chicken house story. And I got to confess that I was never great brains behind our antics. But I was always the one that was the execution of the plans, and sometimes I'd get caught doing things, and I'd be the ones punished. And this guy and my sister would be in the background laughing while I got my rear end tanned. But anyway, this one experience, I don't think we got punished for, but as I mentioned, we had to take turns gathering the eggs. It became her day one day to go out and gather the eggs, but she really contested for the reason that I mentioned. And you said to me, "Come on," I said, "Come on, I'll show you." So I followed him out, and we sneak out behind her. She didn't know we were out there. And she goes in the hen house to gather the eggs with the basket. He reaches over and latches the door from the outside. Has a hook and hole, a nail of some kind, latches the door. So she can't get out. And then he says, now pound on the side. So we pounded on the side of the hen house, making lots of noise. Well, this had the effect of, number one, scaring my sister to death. Number two, and she starts screaming, and the chickens now are alerted, and they're already upset. They're squawking and flapping their wings and creating all kinds of dust and havoc, which creates more screaming for my sister. We are just busting up laughing on the outside. She finally panics, and she rushes to get out of the hen house, and of course the door's locked. And more screaming. So that was the kind of humor that we did on my poor sister, and I apologize to that. But anyway, it was all in good fun.
It was fun.
Hopefully, yeah.
You know, it's a little few years later, but I was telling a story on my bank a couple nights ago, our 50th high school class reunion, about how when she was, 16, and wanted to go to a Sunday night movie. Now, remember now, this is 1950 something.
Well, she graduated in 55, so
53 or 4. And the big deal in Johnstown was a Sunday night movie. We got the movie on Wednesday nights when Dad was at Masonic Lodge, and the whole price was 9 cents for us, I think, to get in.
I don't remember that.
Well,
of course, I never paid, so I don't know if I would know, but anyway.
Well, she convinced finally Dad to let her go to this movie on Sunday night, because all the high school kids did this. So all we had, of course, to drive, we wouldn't let her take the new car, it was 49 Ford, so we let her take the farm truck, which is a 3-speed, push-button start, hard to shift, old truck, hard to drive. So she gets all dressed up in the dress, and she drove up there, and she thought she'd park, so it wouldn't have to parallel park. She pulled in the last spot at the traffic light, catty corner from this little theater, so she could start up there, get right through the light, and go away. Movie ends, all the high school guys sit across on the church lawn on this little brick wall, watch the girls come out. Well, she comes prancing out there all dressed up, and she goes through the light, and she gets in the truck. She's a little excited and doesn't drive a whole lot, just got her license, so she forgot to use the clutch. And she pushed this start button, no safety catches in those days of any type, and the truck started. Well, it went through the light, thank goodness, I hope it was green, I hope it might have been red. And she's trying to forgot about the clutch, she's all nervous, the guys are watching, and the truck goes boom, 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 all the way through this light in first gear without the clutch being used. The high school guys are just howling and laughter, of course. She's totally embarrassed. She reached down to try to shift the gear, and the knob always came off. She cut a palm of her hand doing that. She was all dressed up, and she, of course, then drove home. And I don't know if she ever told us her story, but the guy sure told me on Monday morning what had happened about her.
She would have been mortified. Well, let's finish up here, Terry, talking about the end of our childhood, because it ended rather abruptly. We had a very nice childhood, very happy childhood. We had lots of stories about that we could tell, but let's talk about the breakup of our family, which happened, let's say, over the course of about 2 years. But, let me see if we got the chronology right. Eleanor graduated from Johnstown High School in 1955, and she went off to Ohio State that fall. And so that was the first member of our family to leave, and she spent a lot of time at university. We enjoyed that experience at OSU. But also, during that time, I'm thinking about 56, Mom had cancer surgery. She found out she had colon cancer, had surgery. And you might talk about, was that when the first crisis occurred with her health? Was that the second surgery?
That's
the first. Describe that, because I don't remember too much.
It was colon cancer, and Dad had just bought a brand new 1956 four-door Ford, Chilcote Ford, yellow, white, yellow.
Mm-hmm.
That car, beautiful car. And he lamented about that. I shouldn't have bought that car. I can't afford that car now. She has cancer. He kept it, but she had surgery. They took out about a foot of her large intestine. Of course, in those days, colon cancer surgery was a lot different than it is here in 2008, and the whole treatment was different. She was in the hospital, of course, quite some time, and I remember that he would go over every day to see her. When one day, he and I were in the barn doing milking at night, and Aunt Helen and Uncle Austin drove in the driveway. They've gotten a call. I don't know why. Maybe our answer our phone. Maybe they didn't have a phone. I don't know. And they said, you better rush to the hospital. Menzies taking a turn for the worse. So he dropped everything. And I'm there. I got to finish what I need doing, finish the milking. He went to the hospital. Yeah. We went to bed. He came back by midnight, woke us up, and he said, your mother is not expected to live until morning.
Terrible thing.
Our sister lost her supper on the floor.
She would have been 42 or thereabouts.
Yep. Of course, I had to clean up that mess.
Yeah.
We all were sick in our stomachs. And of course, what worse news could you get? She made it. And the problem seemed to be they did not tend well to the electrolyte balance. They were giving her IVs and they got her electrolyte balance out of whack. It was not the cancer at all. So she got through that. She lived about 22 months beyond that before dying in March 1st,
1958.
Yeah.
And you were a senior in high school, and you graduated from high school then that spring. But we lost. My sister got married in the fall of '57, so they left to go to Indianapolis. Mother died in March '58, and you went to Denison in that fall of '58. So there were 3 of our 5 family gone within a very short period of time. And then Dad and I lived alone for 2 years, and then I went off to Ohio State. And then Dad remarried in November of 1960. So within about 4 years, our family broke up completely. So anyway, I think that's an interesting part of our life history. It was a sad tragedy, obviously, to lose our mother. She was, as Terry explained, very vivacious and happy woman, and we have great memories of Mom. Dad married Lois Brown and had a second wonderful marriage. And Lois became like a sister to all of us, and she was a wonderful grandmother to our children, and we were fortunate to have that situation work out so well.
We didn't cater to that marriage very well.
No, we didn't.
It was scary to us because no one could replace our mother. That taught me, at least, a very valuable lesson. When you see what Dad had gone through, how much it brightened his life again, she was just an absolute blessing. I was dumb to think that it shouldn't have happened.
Well, we were selfish. It was our mother. We couldn't picture our dad with anybody else except our mother. So, but that worked out very well. Lois took such good care of Dad, took him traveling. He never got to travel with work, and she took exceptionally good care of him. And as he said later on, I was fortunate because a lot of people don't even have one good marriage. I had 2 good marriages. So that was just a great thing.
He used to say, of course, he didn't want to fly, never flown.
Oh, yeah.
I think the first flight was Hawaii, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
And Lois would say, I drugged him up, we got him over there okay.
Yeah, he brought back pineapple.
Yes,
and all this
now it's dropping too much pineapple. He loved it when he got there, but I thought, how would you like to be a farm boy as he was, having nothing, and then finally having the ability to travel on first flights to Hawaii?
Think about his youth, what life was growing up without electricity, without water, without indoor plumbing, and ending your life flying to Hawaii for vacation. Talk about a generational change, huge change just in his lifetime.
He wanted to be an attorney, and we don't know the reason why, except the probably the money's in the school, except grandfather reportedly said to him, what do you want to be? And he said, attorney. He said, no, they're all shysters. I'm going to send you to college.
Yeah.
Which is probably just a way of saying I can't afford this.
Yeah.
So Dad really was shortchanged education-wise, too.
Well, he didn't do much. I think he didn't do much in the way of school activities because his dad didn't support him. He did play high school football his senior year, and his dad never came to one game, he told me. So he didn't get a lot of support. Of course, he was married to Lucy at that point. I suspect that she didn't care about that either. So.
What goes around comes around in some ways because he had an awful tough time getting permission to even play football. And of course, he would tell us stories about how he blocked so-and-so and he was so much bigger. When I was 8th grade, I asked permission from Dad if I could stay after school to try to just catch a couple fly balls during the varsity baseball practice. And he said, you can, but you got to walk home 3.5 miles, then do your chores. Well, he went through that kind of thing when he was that age. So
yeah. It was
I guess
natural to him.
we should have made our kids do that.
That's right.
They can make their kids.
It's too easy on our kids, haven't we? Well, what else do you want to talk about? Anything else? We're about out of time, but you want to talk about, I'm trying to think of the one-room schoolhouse.
I tell the story about the one-room school building. And the other thing I think about, they always drove horses to church. And the middle of the church was probably 2 or 3 miles away from the house. This is when Dad was little. And he would tell stories about how when the Sunday school was over, the kid would slip out back during the church service and race their horses up and down the road. And of course, they'd come back, and the church would come out, and our grandfather would come out, and other people would say, why are my horses all lathered up? It's the middle of winter. I said, I don't know what happened. I don't know how they're lathered up.
Yeah. Well, the one-room schoolhouse thing, are you going to...
I was going to tell the Jock Love story about how
yeah.
Dad would tell the recitation bench was the big deal in school. Now, this was grades 1 through 8, one teacher. I had no electricity, I'm sure. Just a hot body stove.
No, dug well.
Common
water, one common teacup.
Cup, yep. And he would tell stories about how each grade would have to come up the front of the recitation bench and sit on this bench by the teacher, the people doing the work in the back of the room. And they'd get together, a certain person